I think it works.
All right.
Gilad Atzmon, hello.
Good afternoon.
For the people who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a jazz artist. I recorded with a lot of people. Some of them are very famous, and a lot of rock bands and so on and so on. And I'm also a controversial author. I am famous for my deconstruction of Jewish identity and criticism of identity politics in general. Sorry.
No, you are the author of two great books, at least two that I've read.
I wrote a few books that talk about the wandering ooh and being in time, I guess.
Yes, and there was I think I've read it in French. The title is, of course, The Wandering Who, but which is a great title. But it's the one about
the perplexed.
Esther, the Esther paradox.
The parable of Esther and the Wandering Who. It's the same, really. It's the same book, really.
Oh, okay.
Supposed to be the same book. It's two editions. It was a bit of a mess there. But anyway, I'm very critical of all forms of identity politics, and I get into a lot of trouble for saying what I think. But I think that by now, a lot of people should understand that the crisis that we are seeing, that threatens to really destroy the world as we know it, it's really a civil war, is thanks to identity politics. And as a critic of identity politics, I obviously very critical of contemporary left, but I argue that right-wing activists and enthusiasts who adopt identity politics actually are making a mistake and becoming a subgroup of the left. So they don't really serve their cause. They have a great opportunity now, the right, to fill this hole that was created by the left. And what is the hole? What is that hole? Working class, working people. Working people have to be united rather than being broken into segments defined by biology. And this is exactly what we see in France, and this is exactly what we don't see in America or in Britain. We see the working class being broken by campaigners who unfortunately are paid by the privileged, by the rich, by Wall Street, by the city, and so on and so on.
Now, what is the genesis of identity politics, in your opinion?
I wrote quite a lot about it, and there are many ways to look at it. To start with, when it comes to Judaism and Jewish identity and Jewish nationalism, one of the most fascinating findings is that from the very beginning in Babylon, it operated as an identitarian discourse. So for the Jews in general, identitarianism is not new at all. And this also explains why they are so good at it. So despite the fact that I'm so critical of Jewish identity and so on, just the fact that I was raised in a Jewish environment and was a Jew for the, let's say, for the first 30 years of my life, secular, I'm probably way more sophisticated about identity politics than an ordinary gay politics leader or trans or even black, because for all those people, identity politics is pretty new. Now, why it is so inherent to Jewish politics? Because, and I wrote about it in The Wandering Jew, because Judaism, the way it was formed in Babylon, was very similar to the moment of the formation of Zionism in the late 19th century. Jews were assimilating in Babylon. It was a very friendly exile. And at a certain stage, like in Europe after the French Revolution, in Babylon they started to see that unless they do something radical, they will disappear into the crowd. They will become Babylonians. And this is the moment where Judaism was invented, Yadut, the way we know it. When these Babylonians come back to Palestine, decades later, they have very little in common with the Jews who stay there. And we see a big conflict. So what they really created is an identitarian discourse where the Jews are an exilic identity. They are not part of the Babylonians. Their whole identity is set around this differentiation from the other. And it is probably this exactly the issue that makes Zionism such a complicated project nowadays, because their whole existence is based on the exilic identity, on the idea of next year in Jerusalem. But once they come to Jerusalem, the entire ethos collapses. So if Zionism, for instance, was a promise to make Jews into ordinary people, they said, okay, we see that there is nationalism in France and in Britain and in Germany and all those places in the late 19th century or mid-19th century, 70s or whatever, in Italy, of course. The Jews say, okay, the only problem for us is that we cannot join a nationalist movement because we are not on our land. Once we go to our land, this is what the early Zionists said. I don't say that it's their land, but in their fantasy, this was their land. Mm-hmm. All our problems would be solved. And as we could see, it was very successful for a decade, 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. But now Israel is the Jewish state. It is surrounded by ghetto walls. It made the Palestinians into goyim de jour. You're right? Mm-hmm. For you, I understand. So, yeah. I'm sure that you understand. And eventually this year, last year or 2 years ago, they even decided to define themselves as the Jewish state by law. All right? So the ghetto came back and they surrendered to their identitarian discourse. Now, I would accept that everyone can learn how to do identitarianism, but when you have 2,500 or 3,000 years of ardent identitarianism, you develop some strategies. You become very good at it. And they are indeed very good at it. And a lot of the things that we see is that they control the discourse and the opposition. They always manage to dominate two poles of every discourse that is relevant to their existence. So if, for instance, there is a debate about farmers and milk industry, it's not very interesting. They let you engage in this debate. But if capitalism becomes the problem, its number one enemies will be the Jewish Marxists. If Palestine becomes a problem, yeah, the people that would dominate the Palestinian solidarity discourse will be Jewish activists. If neocon wars becomes a problem, so we will have Noam Chomsky becoming the most vibrant voice. Now, I don't necessarily argue that this is conspiratorial. Let's assume you are Swiss, so it's not a good example because you are not involved as a nation in a lot of mess. But let's say that you are a French, for instance, because you're probably broadcasting in French. Am I right?
Yeah, we'll keep it in English, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, but you know, so but I assume that a lot of your
Yes.
listeners are French.
Yes, they are.
So if you are French and you understand that your country is involved in a lot of non-ethical activities, you may say, no, I'm French, but this is not what I believe in. This doesn't represent me, the war in Libya or whatever. So it is natural for Jews to become very prominent voices in opposition to other symptoms that are actually established by Jews. Now, you asked me a question, and I gave so much background, and I didn't really address it. I'm really sorry about it.
No,
what
for sure.
What we see is that at a certain stage in the early 20th century, some prominent Jewish intellectuals, and in my work, the ones that I identify are those who were in the Frankfurt School, which is Adorno and Horkheimer and Erich Fromm and Marcuse. Some of those names are very famous in France.
Yep.
Marcuse, for instance. And another one that I identified that was part of this wave, he wasn't in the same school, but he really was very close to that school intellectually, was William Reich. They understood that the revolution is not happening, and they realized that the way forward is to move society towards a revolution by cultural means. And a lot of people call it cultural Marxism, and some people within the left are offended by it. But I think that it is a fair naming, because it's a culture, it's a revolution that is happening by cultural means. Now, this is exactly what we see now around us. What they're saying, you're saying we are going to topple the symbols of a white racism or blah, blah, blah. This is exactly cultural revolution. This is exactly cultural Marxism. Now, I'm obviously quite embarrassed by it, because this is not a revolution. This is an outburst of violent energies that are not going to help the working class, the working people. And one of the questions that I ask in my work is why the yellow vests in France are so different and so focused on their needs in opposition to the rebellion spirit that we see in America and Britain. where they concentrate on destroying historical monuments, killing dead bronze statues, instead of really improving the situation. It is amazing to see how unfocused, how noisy, they are very noisy in America and Britain. And it's not that I'm obviously totally against all form of racism, but not to see that the police violence in America, for instance, or Britain police discrimination against black, is not the problem, it is a symptom of the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem is engraved in society. And one of my answers why, and this is pretty devastating, and I'll get into some shit for saying it, but I'm unfortunately right. One of the problems that we identify is that for a revolution, for a change to take place, you have to make sure that the liberation struggle is led by people who have nothing to do with the people who are in a state of hegemony. All right? So, for instance, the Bolshevik Revolution was a successful revolution, not that I support it or not support it, but they managed to win. Whether it is good or not is another question, because the Bolsheviks had very little to do with the Slavophilic and the Tsar and the Russian elite. They were different people. One of the reasons that Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it, was successful in China or in Cuba, the revolution, I mean, or in Venezuela, maybe you agree with it, you don't agree with it, I don't get into this debate, okay, is because we were dealing with two different classes that were really fighting. One of the reasons that Palestinian solidarity evaporated and led nowhere is because at a certain stage it became very clear that on one side we have the Jewish state, and on the other side we have the Jewish anti-Zionists. It became a minor dispute that was an internal Jewish dispute. And the Jewish anti-Zionists, whether they were genuine or not, made sure that instead of talking about the right of return, we start to talk about end of the occupation. Instead of bringing Palestinians back to their land, we start to talk about the right of Jews to BDS. And in general, they start to make sure that instead of liberating Palestine, all the Palestinian solidarity movements around the world started to get worried about tracing the anti-Semites in the movement. It collapsed. Thanks God the Palestinians realized it, and they now do marches every week in the Gaza border. They said, you know, you do your solidarity. We have a land to liberate. Mm-hmm. The same happened in the civil rights movement. At a certain stage, Jews became very involved. Why they became very involved? Was it because they really believe in it? Maybe. I'm sure that I believe that people as individuals can be wonderful people.
Sure.
But what really happened in practice is at a certain stage, Jewish voices became the masters of the racial or anti-racist discourse. And at this point, they didn't need the blacks anymore. They just became the masters of the discourse. And this was the end of the civil rights movement. And as we can see now, by the existence of Black Lives Matter, actually, maybe legally there were changes, but racism and discrimination is still engraved and inherent to American society. So we really didn't solve the problems. Again, for a revolution to succeed, you have to make sure that you don't allow the discourse to be hijacked, and a lot of people in Black Lives Matter are saying now, saying exactly the right thing. There's the same thing, that by people who are not you, that are using you to serve their causes. And this is exactly happening now. Now, when we look at the problem, at the systematic problem of the left in the West, we find out that at large, it is supported by different philanthropic organizations, such as Open Society Institutes, that is associated with Soros. And the chance that they will concentrate on destroying Wall Street is zilch, zero, nothing. It's not going to happen. So instead of getting us to the street, demanding what we really need, which is health services, education, income, factory, productions. So we have a good reason to wake up in the morning. Instead of that, this bunch of morons concentrating on killing dead bronze statues. And this is the classic situation that we are seeing now. And I just wrote something on Facebook. It is very clear that within the Jewish discourse, both Zionists and anti-Zionists, they all support the black, and it's great, you know. I'm a jazz artist. I'm supporting the black, of course. So they, as white people, because they are white when they want to be white, and they're black when they want to be black, as white people, they say, we are against white privilege, we are so sorry for all this, which is all fine, great. What about me being against Jewish privilege, which is definitely, you know, if you look at the demography, the economic status of Jews, you know, they are amongst the most successful ethnic minorities in the West, and so on and so on. Can we also be against Jewish privilege? Can Jews be against Jewish privilege? Can other people be against Jewish privilege? Of course not.
Of course not.
And this hypocrisy is something, you know, I'm mentioning it, but you don't need me to understand it, because a lot of people can see it. And I was the one who defined Jewish power as the power to silence criticism of Jewish power. This is the classic definition of Jewish power. I collect royalties on this one. This is the situation.
So now, just because of definitions, what's your definition of a Jew?
Okay.
It's a simple question.
It's not a simple question at all. And I actually managed to answer it in my work. And like a proper Jew, I'm doing the pilpul on you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I'm open about it. I'm not hiding it from you. What I realized as soon as I start to look into it is that if you ask this question, you will never be able to find an answer.
Okay.
And the reason that you cannot find an answer is because there is the religious entity, there is the racial entity. I don't say that they are a race, but they identify as a race. They identify themselves as a race. There is the nationalist context, Zionism, not Zionism. there is the cultural. Some now they start to tell you, listen, I'm not a Zionist, I'm a cultural Jew. So what is a cultural Jew? I eat with my mother, I eat matzah balls. I tell them, listen, this is nice, but this is not a political argument, matzah balls, yeah? So they have the cultural, the race, the nationalist, the religion, and it is like a quantum mechanics. They are nowhere, you can never find where they are or what they are. And I said, okay, let's leave, forget about this question, because it is not an interesting question.
Okay.
I looked into this question and I said, instead of asking who are the Jews, or to define what are the Jews, I said, let's try to understand what those who identify themselves as Jews mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very powerful position. Instead of asking what is a Nazi, because you are a Nazi, you are not a Nazi. If you identify yourself as a Nazi, I can ask, sorry man, what do you mean by that? So I asked exactly that, and then I can analyze, I can deconstruct your theory, or your philosophy, or agree with you, or I don't know, whatever. So when I looked into this, and this is where I started the Wandering Who, or the parable of Esther. When I looked into it, I realized that we are dealing with three main identifications. Some people identify themselves, this is group number one, as Jews because they believe in the Torah. This is, at the time I thought, an innocent category. So the fact that you believe in the Torah, I thought at the time, doesn't really imply that you have to take the lands of the Palestinians. I had good reason to believe that this is the case. Maybe this is still the case, but this is the first identitarian definition. Group number two identify themselves as Jews because they have Jewish ancestry. My mother is Jewish, my father is Jewish, my aunt is Jewish. I feel, okay, this is also an innocent category. The fact that you have a Jewish mother doesn't make you into a war criminal or a nasty human being or whatever.
Of course.
The third, of course. So we have two groups. The third group is more problematic. The third group are the people who identify themselves primarily and politically as Jewish. Now, this is a more problematic category. Why? Because if you identify yourself politically as a Jew, it means that I may be able to join the club tomorrow, but if you are not a Jew, you will never be able to join the club. Unless you go through, I don't know, 12 years of conversion or whatever. It's a racially oriented club.
Okay.
Okay, now when I came up with this definition, one of the first things that I found out was that when it comes to the third category, which is the most problematic category, there is really no difference between the Zionist and the anti-Zionist Jews, when the Jewish anti-Zionists, because they all identify themselves as Jews. Who inspired me to come up with this idea? In my research, I came across the work of Chaim Weizmann. Now, Chaim Weizmann has never said it as such. Chaim Weizmann was one of the most sophisticated Zionist thinkers. He was also the first president of Israel. He never said it as such, but this is the real crux, the real core of his Zionist philosophy. And it goes like that. There are no French Jews, American Jews, British Jews. There are Jews who live in France, Jews who live in America, Jews who live in Britain. What he really tried to say when you are a Jew, you are primarily Jewish before you are anything else. Before you are British, before you are French, before you are a peace lover, before you are a Palestinian lover. I therefore differentiate between the Jewish anti-Zionists, which is an exclusive, racially exclusive group. We had a group in Labour Party supporting the closest allies to Jeremy Corbyn, who was uniquely embarrassing guy. And they were called the Jewish Voice for Labour, JVL. And they said in their site, I have the photo shoot on my site, not photo shoot, screenshot, photo shoot. I have a screenshot. I can provide it to you if you need it for your program. They said, if you are a member of the Labour Party and you are a Jew, you can join us. But if you are a member but not a Jew, you can only be a supporting, be a supporter. You cannot become part of our member. They are basically, these are our leftists. They are basically more racist than Israel, because in Israel, the third biggest party is an Arab party.
Yeah. If I want to do something privately like this, like a club, where only certain category of people can come and not, I will be sentenced into it by a tribunal to a fine, and that organization will be removed.
Of course. So in the Labour Party under Corbyn, people could operate in a racially exclusive club, and he allowed it. Would he also allow people calling themselves white voice for labor or Aryan voice for labor? All right. So they're in the left. They kind of developed this attitude where some people are allowed to be racist or allowed to operate in racial formations, and others aren't. And this is why, and I got a lot of Zionists were very upset by me, but I said the other day, I wrote a tweet, and I said, the left must decide whether it is pro-black, which means pro the oppressed, or pro-Jewish, i.e. pro-privileged, which, by the way, within the idea of, and I write a lot about it, with the idea of nationalist socialism. I say nationalist socialism as opposed to national socialism, so I'm not talking about the German party,
sure,
but about a philosophy that was that became very, very popular in the beginning of the 20th century. And this is fascinating. You must bond the working class with the elite, and you have to push to equality, but the only way to do it is to bond these forces. And this was the philosophy behind Mussolini's fascism. And this was also the philosophy that led the National Socialist Party in Germany before they adopted this racist ideology. So Hitler actually said, no, let's have a socialism of one race, which is obviously a problematic concept. I know that quite a lot of people actually think that it's a great concept,
well,
but,
not so many.
Not so many admit it. But the other day I had a discussion on Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember Metropolis, the film, Fritz Lang.
Yes.
It is all about searching for the leader, the whole film, like 3 hours, searching for the leader that unites the aristocracy together with the working class. And this is the difference between traditional Marxism and nationalist socialism. In traditional Marxism, the rich is always the enemy. In nationalist socialism, the rich, the owner, is a potential partner, is not necessarily regarded as a parasite. What is amazing for me is that the left, and this is very important, very crucial, and as you probably know, I'm getting a lot of trouble from the left because I expose them. I argue that the left, and even the most vocal voices in the so-called left, are now adopted the most problematic aspects of not nationalist socialism, but Hitlerism. Because the original thought of the left was, it doesn't matter if you're black, if you're white, if you're a Jew, if you're Muslim, if you're French, if you are Belgian, if you are Palestinian or Israeli, we are all working class.
Sure.
Now, I don't say that you have to agree with it or not, but this was the idea.
It's
It
true.
It historically true, and the whole idea was to unite us all into a fist of anger and revolution, so we can make the world a better place. At a certain stage, the left went the other way around. They want you to identify as black, as white, as gay, as trans, as female lesbian, as male gay, homosexual. And basically, 99% of those definitions are defined by your biology, your skin color, your Jewish gene that you get from the mother, your sexual preference. They basically adopted the most problematic aspect of Hitlerian philosophy. They are all Hitlerian who believe in biological determinism. Now, what is most amazing now, and this is beautiful to watch, I'm having a lot of fun at the moment, I must admit. They are toppling statues in America and Britain. I don't think that in France.
Soon.
It will come. Not yet.
It will come.
Okay, they're toppling basically why? Because they want to change the history. But all those years, the left told us that it was against history revisionism. Now they took history revisionism. You know, Soral and Dieudonné, they were history revisionists. They were the number one enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I am saying about it is that history can only become a meaningful event or a meaningful adventure when it is revised, when it is reflected in the light of our intellectual shift. I have won this debate. The entire left is behind me. The only difference is that I say, listen, if you really think that Jefferson, Washington, or Columbus, or Churchill were fucking racists, don't pull their statues. Make sure that you just put something on the pavement. Make sure that you engrave something in the stone, that it cannot be removed. Because statues, for me, are like books. What does it mean that we have a statue of Jefferson? It means that at a certain stage in history, and actually for quite a long while, this guy was hailed as a prominent thinker with tremendous influence. And you say, hey, but he was a racist, but we turned blind eye to it. Look at it. This is the place to go. Keep it. Keep it. This is your only way to see how you morph with time.
Now, recently, many of those minority protests started to I cannot put it any other way. Also, the definition is probably needed here as well. They started to scan some anti-Semitic slogans. Now, is it the case of the golem turning against its master, or how do you explain that this is so out of control from the organization, who, as you said,
Let me
have
put
leaders?
it this way. It is very clear that, and we saw it in France, and we saw it in the occupation movement in America 6 years ago. I don't know.
Yeah.
And people say the Hamas was formed by Israel. People say that the Taliban was formed by America. And there is truth in all these statements. When you create a grassroots organization that is devoted to its own authentic needs, sooner or later, it will develop a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, when the occupation movement started in America, I said, wow, this is an exciting moment. But shortly after, we started to see some people, some black people, activists shouting, we want the Jews out of Wall Street. Some, I don't remember the slogans.
Mm-hmm.
And people start to talk about the occupation being anti-Semitic. I remember it started in the end of August. I don't remember how many years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember it because I was away. And then a few weeks later, I remember it, there was a Kol Nidrei. Kol Nidrei is a Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is an atonement day. It's a Jewish holy, very sacred day. There was a Kol Nidrei prayer in Wall Street occupation. I realized, oh, okay, so everything is now under control. And it took me another 2-3 years to understand that the guy who actually started this wave was what he called himself, I think, a cultural Jew, and he's the guy who started for the 1%, we are the 99%, and so on and so on. So it's exactly the same thing, it evolved into something that was very dangerous, and it was killed. We may see the same thing happening to Black Lives Matter, because once they will start to develop their own grassroots authentic voice, some people who actually have to fund and to lead and to steer this organization will either destroy it or will expose it from inside or whatever. They have exactly 3,000 years of tactics to deal with it. And now let's look at the Bolshevik Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a Bolshevik Revolution, and we killed the Tsar and his family, and there is a big war there, and it is won, and there is a huge catastrophic famine in Ukraine, and Lenin, it's not chronological the way I present it. The famine was actually in the 30s, but Lenin, I think, died, what was it, 21 or 22, I don't remember.
21?
Yeah, early days.
Yeah. 21.
And Trotsky is supposed to be the guy who takes over.
Yeah.
And something else happens. It is Stalin.
Yeah.
And then it takes a completely different route. And gradually, however surely, it becomes more and more hostile to the Jews.
It's true.
And one of the most interesting things is that a lot of people are telling you that history never repeats itself. I think that to say history is never repeats itself is as stupid as saying history always repeats itself.
Of
It's
course.
two kind of history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but unfortunately, Jewish history repeats itself. And this is one of the most interesting enigmas because we are dealing with very clever and sophisticated people, people who are educated, people who know their culture, and while everyone learns from history, despite the fact that history doesn't repeat itself, the Jews who should be the first to learn from their history and not to push it, to say, okay, we have to slow down here. We are exposed here. They keep repeating the same mistake. Now, what is so fascinating for me is when I started to write about all of it, I think that I was still a Jew. If you would ask me, I would identify myself as a Jew. And I wrote about it because I really believed that I understand what is going on and they are pushed into a disaster. And maybe I can say something that will change it. This was the impetus behind my music. You know that I'm a jazz musician.
Yes.
And I made I formed this band, the Orient House Ensemble, and it was a world success. Our albums were selling all over the world and so on and so on. And I thought, I will Palestinize the Jewish music, and I will make Israelis understand that other people can also suffer. They also want to go back to their promised land. I kind of put a mirror. The first thing that I felt was that the Jewish left was after me, not even the Zionists. Even still, I give workshops on the net because we were in lockdown. Half of my students are from Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Half of my, not student, I say student, many of them are old friends of mine, people who played with, and they're all there and they comment, and I don't have issue with problem, but my first objective was to maybe open their eyes to the disaster that they may bring on themselves. The first thing that I faced was a wall of contempt, mainly by the Jewish left. All the people within the Jewish left who were after me are now also expelled as anti-Semites by design. So it is a chaotic mad throwing, and at very early in this fight, I said, you know what? I don't try to save you. I really don't want to be part of this tribe anymore. I want to talk about the world the way I see it. You want to see me as a Jew, not a Jew. I just don't want anything to do with you guys. I never went back to Israel. I started to learn more about Palestine, and this is where I'm now. I probably understand this topic better than most people. I think that still The Wandering Who is the best-selling book on Jewish identity politics. Not because I'm the most clever guy, because maybe I was the most stupid to share it with the public. But I think that we are moving very rapidly into a disaster.
Now,
And when you look at Jewish history, it is a chain of disasters, and you can see it building up.
this is true. Now, as you may not know, but I've been traveling and working quite a lot in my career in Israel, and living in Geneva, and from school I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, and the vast majority of the people I've always met in Israel and from my friends are, of course, very nice and sweet and very normal in many ways people, and they actually would agree with a lot of things you said, perhaps less with on the Zionism part, which we don't necessarily need to go into, but they would agree on a lot of things you say. For example, a lot of them are against mass immigration, for example, in Europe, and have always been. But when everyone looks at the leaders who are pushing for mass immigration, a majority of them claim to be or revendicate themselves to be Jewish, and sometimes even say that they do it because of the Jewish heritage that they have. And this is an example of the paradox, which is baffling and making, of course, me, but also some of my Jewish friends, they cannot explain it very well. Perhaps you have a better theory on why this happens.
It is quite easy to explain why it happens, but there is a way more interesting insight. I see Pilpul again.
Sure.
There is a way more insight in the fact that you see it, and you're not the only one. Everybody speaks about it. The Jews are so pro-immigration when they are in Europe, but they are the most vile anti-immigration when it comes to their country. They are so progressive, leading the progressive movements, but look at their government. They don't even have a left party. They don't even have a single Jewish left party. The only left party in Israeli parliament is the United Arab List. We had one great Israeli Jew, a member in the Communist Party, Rakach. So the fact that you see it, and when you see it, everybody sees it. Maybe you didn't even think about yourself. I'm aware of this discourse now being... this means that there is already a tsunami of consciousness shift, and the story is exposed. Now, why it happens? First, the non-conspiratorial. If Jews identify themselves as Jews, living amongst other nations, so they see themselves as a minority group within the context of a bigger host nation. If I am a minority group, if I look at my history, I always suffered for being minority group. What I want to do is to turn the entire country into an amalgam of minority groups. How do I do it? First, I break the working class or the people into gender-oriented categories, into sex-oriented categories, so gender-oriented men, women, female, feminist, sex-oriented, gay, LGBT, also, and so on and so on. Then I notice also that there are some people who are black. So I say, all right, let's take the black. We start to push the black. And gradually you get into the situation where you have a society, let's say, can you see? I can see, I'll do it to the camera. This is society. And let's look at America 8 November 2016. It is split in the middle. The people who support Clinton, Hillary, are pretty much half of the American people, a bit more maybe, not American, half of the American voters. And they are defined, this is half of the big cake, and they are divided into people who identify themselves as black, as Hispanic, as gays, as lesbians, as trans, as Puerto Ricans. And the other half, that were enough to win the election for Trump, see themselves as Americans, but they are also, many of them are white, but others are black and lesbians and gays and so on and so on. The problem with identity politics, I now actually add something to your first question, is that when you identify, you remove yourself from authenticity. And this is very, very important. Let's say that I'm gay. I pick it because I'm not. But I can talk about myself as a saxophonist. Let's say that I'm an homosexual. That I love to be, I see women strange, I like to be with other men. It's fine. I've tried it once, I like it. This is where I am. This is very different from being identified as gay or identified as homosexual. When I start to identify as homosexual, I stop engage with the idea of the sexuality. I start to ask myself, if I were gay, what should I wear to this party or to this parade or to this? And I start to put some colorful flags, and I start to fill myself with badges and scarves and so on and so on. And I start to look like a Palestinian solidarity supporter. All right? I'm a saxophonist. I am a saxophonist. I am very good saxophonist. I'm one of the best. I never identified as a saxophonist. If I would identify as a saxophonist, I would start to ask myself, what should I wear? What should I say as a saxophonist? This is removed from the beingness of being a saxophonist. All right? So identity politics that came with the promise to help us to be more authentic actually created the complete opposite. We created fragmented society of non-authentic people. Now, even for Jews, Neturei Karta, Satmar, Lubavitcher, all those Orthodox Jews, they don't speak as Jews. They say, we are Jews. It's not like the Palestinian supporter that will stand up in a Palestinian solidarity campaign and you say, as a Jew, I would like to say that I'm against, as a Jew, not being a Jew, as a Jew. So it is a set of, there is an element of virtuality there, virtuality. And this is a big problem, and this is why it is doomed. It is doomed to crush the identitarian discourse. It is a false promise. It is something that the left invented in a desperate attempt to sustain its relevance.
Now, of course, I agree that it's doomed. However, what is seems to remain is the fact that millions of people, sometimes desperate people, and sometimes for whatever reason, we may have different opinions here, behave in a very criminal manner, are remaining. And this is creating tensions, and that will lead me to my next question, which is about your excellent article on the controlled demolition of the West, which is leading to tensions that are unrecoverable in such a difficult economic time, and in my theory, a declining economic time to a collapse. And this seems to me quite, if I may say, this fragmentation of society is a very stupid result to be created by such high IQ people.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned my article about the controlled demolition of the West. I think that thank you for accepting that it is an important article. I think that it is an important article. The insight wasn't mine. The guy, I don't remember his name at the moment. Sorry, I'm getting old. But the kind of economy expert for American CNBC, so it's like not a conspiratorial. He actually came with this observation. He said what we see in practice is the biggest wealth transfer in the West. We saw in the West, or one of the biggest transfer, blah, 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 blah. And he gives the numbers. He said, despite the fact that America, and I'm sure that the same happened in France and definitely in Britain, despite the fact that America is falling apart economy-wise, that shops and small businesses and medium-sized businesses and even huge corporates filing bankruptcies, like the other day I heard about Hertz, which means that within the next few weeks we will see most of rental companies, for instance, falling apart. I don't think that many airlines, for instance, will survive this crisis. Despite the fact that we are seeing huge amount of unemployment, at the time I think that was 42 million people in America filled income support application or something, which is 15% or something. Wall Street grew by, I'm very close, if it's not the exact number, at the time, 2 weeks when I published it, 670 billion.
Yes.
Which is pretty much the all of the aids that was given by the government, it all went to Wall Street, not to the people. And we have seen it before.
Yep.
We have seen it before. And this guy at CNBC was very clever. He said, if you want to understand this anomaly, it's quite easy to understand it. Wall Street is not about economy, the state of the economy. It's about the future of big business. All right? So a lot of money goes to Amazon, because if there are no bookshops and there are no everything goes to Amazon. Google, Facebook, all those companies becoming more and more relevant, and so on and so on, relevant and strong. And this is the story. Now, the first question that you want to ask, how is it possible that we are, and this is crucial, that at the time where we all witness a huge plunder of us, the people, humanity, of our last significant assets, while watching all this money going into the very, very, very few, the richer get richer, we are basically annihilated. The moronic left, I would like to say worldwide, but it's really in the West, and especially in the English-speaking English-speaking empire, is leading us to a race war, to a war against fellow working people, against policemen. More than anything else, actually, it is the black neighborhoods in America that need the police.
Of course.
Because this is where you have the crime. I'm not taking a position. I really don't want to see police violence. But what I want to see the left fighting for us working people. And instead of that, they are pushing for a race war, for a demolition of bronze statues. And it is very easy to explain, because they are the same people. So, what do I mean by that? And I'm not taking a position here against Black Lives Matter, because I do believe that Black Lives Matter, but if a movement is lightly, gradually, significantly, whatever, funded by the wrong people, it subscribes to the wrong objectives, and it betrays its causes. This is very devastating, and this explains why Corbyn was a total failure. And there is something, I don't know if you saw this article. We are on Skype, yeah? I'm going to do it now. Can I send you a picture, and you will? Are you editing the stuff, or?
Sure, I will put it on if it's send it on.
Yeah, I want to share something with you. Okay, so this is here, and this is. You know what? I will send it to you. I will send it to you after, because you will edit after. You probably cannot
absolutely.
edit. Yeah,
it's better.
Yeah, so I don't want to interfere. But what I'm going to, it is something that I showed the other day, and I wrote an article about it, and it annoys me completely. And I want you to share this image with your audience. So basically, in 2012, an American artist called Mir One put a mural, painted a wall in East London. And basically, in this mural, there was a Monopoly board that was resting on a herd of black slaves. So there were black slaves, then a Monopoly board on them. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
You've seen it. Yeah. And on top of the board, there were 6 or 5 or 7 bunkers, kind of playing monopolies. One of them was counting money. The Jewish community was upset because 1 or 2 of the bunkers had big noses. They say hooked noses. The labor local council, like the local government. Yeah. this may save you one day, or get you into trouble. It depends where things go.
Or the opposite.
Yeah. All right. The Labour Council ordered to erase it from the wall. Corbyn opposed it for a kind of a strange argument that I really didn't dig into. In 2018, when Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, his support for the mural came back. And everybody spoke about the bunkers with the big nose. No one saw that there were black slaves. I mean, no one. I'm talking about The Guardian, called it anti-Semitic, because 2 of the bunkers had big noses. The Morning Star, our most radical lefty daily paper in Britain, they are usually good. They wrote extensive articles saying why it is bad art and bad politics. Not one mention to slaves. Yeah, the slaves are out of the picture. Not one person saw the slaves. Corbyn apologized for supporting the mural. So he also didn't see the slaves. All right? And now, suddenly, this mural, this photo, came back because an American rapper, great actually musician, Ice Cube's, is a hip hop artist.
Yeah.
He brought this photo, and he said, all we have to do is rise up. We the slaves. All we have to do. That's it. Again, the Jewish lobby went for him because they still don't see the slaves. And I'm asking, where is our left? Where is the left? Is not the left there to support the oppressed? They have to make a decision whether they support the slaves, the black, their history, or they support the privilege. Now, what was revealed, and this revealed already in 2012, that out of the 6 bankers, only 2 were Jews. I think that it was Wellberg and Rothschild. Yeah. All the rest were Rockefeller, Anglo-Saxon. All right? So it wasn't even Jewish. We are either surrendering the left authentic support of the oppressed to the sensitivities or objectives of a really leading successful group, or they start to do what they were born, what they claim to be committed to. And my suggestion and my advice to black people, and I think that a lot of them see it, is that make sure that you are in a full control of your discourse. It's your fight. It's your fight. And I want to tell you something that is way more devastating, and I deserve to be punished for saying it. But I heard it yesterday, or 2 days ago. I heard a lecture by a great Harvard professor, Black, Shelby Steele. And it wasn't in reference to the current mess. But he said, and I'm saying it for a while, that when there was segregation and black were in control, when there was apartheid, when the racism was institutional, the achievements of blacks were by far greater. Look what music they brought. How proud they were.
True.
You cannot take it from them.
Yeah.
Once in the 60s, there was civil rights movement, and I'm not against the civil rights movement, but once they became solidarity pets and became victims, the next thing they were sent to die in Vietnam. And those who managed to come back came back to nothing, to see that even the most important cultural assets were invaded.
Well, this is, by the way, it's historically documented, showing that the Johnson administration, and I quote, wanted to turn, I quote, Negro into a plantation for them, for votes. And that is documented. They wanted and they planned for the poverty, organized poverty and dependency of black communities to vote for the Democrats because they would become needful for the government handouts. This was organized.
I obviously read a bit about it. I'm not an expert
Okay.
on black. I'm a Jewologist as opposed to a,
Black politics.
I'm not an expert, but I'm very interested in this. I'll be happy to read, and we can talk about it again. But it is definitely a very serious concern. Who is the contemporary Malcolm X? Who is our Martin Luther King? There are a few very interesting. Look what they go through. Look at Farrakhan. Very interesting voice. I always hear him talking, and it always makes sense to me. Who are the people who are chasing Farrakhan? Why do they chase Farrakhan? Farrakhan is critical of some Jewish cultural element. Is he allowed to? Is he allowed to? Are we allowed to be against white cultural element, but we are not allowed to be against? Why? Why? Why the same people are against white but prevent us from being against similar and sometimes more significant, crucial or supremacist aspect in Jewish culture? That's it. And I think that I can talk about it. I'm trying to be as polite as I can when I'm talking about it, but I think that everything that I'm saying now is becoming common knowledge.
I see.
Common knowledge, and it's very dangerous.
I think it's indeed. It's these days what you say is very dangerous, and it was being born in the early 70s. I remember that you could do a lot of jokes, in a very friendly and non-harmful way. For example, including on Jews. Today, these jokes would push me into jail, and the discourse has become extremely dangerous for all parties. And I agree with you, and this is also part of my job. The situation is very dangerous for Jewish people as well, because the situation will make it, as you said, the history is dramatic for the people who are caught in the storm that is
and this is something that is very crucial, because for many years some intellectuals, commentators, both Jewish and people who are critical of Jewish politics, Zionism, and so on, pointing at the similarities between Weimar 1930s and America. It's the demography of the Jews, the percentage within the population, the way the wealth is divided, the urban versus the rural. If people cannot see that this is where we are, and it can turn in very, very short time. People don't understand. We were living in a world that was pretty messy, but it was sustained, gradually deteriorating for many years. Look what happened to us in just 3 months.
Yeah.
Look what it took to close all of us.
Yeah.
The entire West.
And if I can give you an historical reference, the German legislative elections of September 1932, so that's during the Weimar Republic, I think the Nazi party had 7% of the votes. And as the government couldn't be done, the elections, so they had three cycles of election from September to early January. And the elections of January, September, October, November, 4 months later, gave the coalition of the Nazi party and the other parties that that coalesced with them, the nationalists and the socialists, gave them majority in 4 months. At 4 months before, it was only 7%. And things can indeed move very fast because Weimar republics always precede something else.
Of course. So this is, I would have loved to believe that more than anyone else, the Jews understand how sour can things turn, and
yet you are criticized for this. You are criticized, and I am criticized to say this in different ways.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So listen, I accept that I'm saying things that that I shouldn't be saying, but it is very important for me to make sure that people understand that I'm very careful in my language. However, I'm not willing to lie. I'm not willing to lie. Why? Because one of the most important dialectic tensions that are kind of going throughout my entire body of work in the last 4 or 5 years is the crucial dichotomy between Athens and Jerusalem. I argue, and it's Athens and Jerusalem is not my concept. It's something that developed in German philosophy. It was actually introduced to the English-speaking world by Leo Strauss, by a Jewish philosopher who was a student of Martin Heidegger.
Yes. Great philosopher.
Yeah. Athens was the birthplace of Western philosophy, of math, of physics. I would have liked to say astrology, but this is not true. It came from Egypt. But Athens is actually, the Greek are very connected with the Egyptians, as we know.
Yeah.
The tragedy, the aesthetics, poeticism. In Athens, we learn to think for ourselves. And in order to do so, we have to be committed to truth and truthfulness.
Yes.
Jerusalem is a very different concept. It's the concept of revelation. In Jerusalem, we are trained to accept that there is law. This is right and this is wrong. You will learn what to say, what to think. While Athens teaches us how to think, in Jerusalem we learn what to say and what to think. The biggest tragedy that we have around us, through us, the nature of the occupation that devastates our reality is that our Athenians amongst us and the Athenian ethos that dominated the West for so many years and made the West into such a tolerant and pluralist and a scientifically oriented environment has been occupied by Jerusalem ideology that is foreign to the West. And this is where I split from Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss would say that the left, the involvement of the left was a dialogue between Athens and Jerusalem, and I say no, it's a war. And in this war, Jerusalem, at least momentarily, has won. Now, the COVID-19 is a great way to look at it. We are so detached that when, and here I'm very Heideggerian, and I'm going back to Heidegger on technology. Heidegger said initially technology was a process of revelation. Through the making of the table or the chair, you learn about yourself, about your needs, about the wood, about the fabrics that you have maybe used for the chair. You learn to understand the world around you. But technology became a form of exploitation. Here we are, all of us subject to COVID-19, whatever. I'm not a deep believer in this COVID. I wrote a lot about it. I don't even know if COVID is the cause or the symptom. I don't go into that. This is a very interesting debate. But what I'm trying to say, what is very clear, that as soon as we are subject to this crisis, let's say whatever this crisis is, what it really means, instead of looking into it, understanding the truthfulness of it, what we see instead is how to turn it into an industry, into a factory, into vaccine machinery. And this is exactly what Martin Heidegger tried to warn us his entire career. Who are the biggest enemies of Martin Heidegger? The Guardian, the left. Why? Because some people believe that he was anti-Semitic, which is obviously nonsense. He had some things to say about things that he saw. All right? So we're turning blind eye to black slaves in a mural. We turn blind ear to Heidegger. They're trying to tell us, listen, COVID will come, and instead of understanding it, you will turn to make it into a factory, to exploit it, to make it, to turn into money. Everything. We have all the knowledge that we need to understand what is happening, but the powers that dominate our life are there to do one thing, to silence our ability to think. We become Jerusalemites. And by the way, I got a lot of trouble because I said about the Grenfell Tower. You remember that there was a huge building in London that burned. It was a horrific event. And I said, this is exactly Jerusalem. Because an architect doesn't ask himself, what is right? What is the truth of the building? Can I put this kind of cladding or not? Instead of that, we learn to work to follow rules. They call it in Britain, safety and environment, and so on and so on. Rather than thinking, we have algorithms. No. If we don't get out of this Jerusalemite mode, we will be back in the Stone Age in very short time.
I'm afraid I agree. So, Gilad, Toda, thank you very much.
It was great to talk to you.
And
pleasure.
Maybe we'll do it again. Thank you very much.
Anytime. It was. Maybe I spoke too much, but send me the copy as soon as you have it. I'll be delighted to share it.
I'm going to